Thursday, another day of sunshine and showers, but hopefully something a little bit drier coming through as we go into Friday.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. We'll look back tonight at a really magnificent weekend and talk about the future of the monarchy. I think it looks pretty rock solid. But of course, we haven't really debated yet the local elections. On Thursday, we'll debate, are the Tories doomed at the next general election? I think not only are they, but they probably thoroughly deserve to be. We'll look at the rental market and ask, is a leading city businessman right when he calls Michael Gove a communist? And I'll tell you about a row that is brewing between the Television Awards and my nomination to be News Presenter of the Year. Yes, that really is going to be fun over the next few days. But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. Our top story tonight on GB News. 4 new official photographs have been released of Their Majesties the King and Queen, as well as other members of the royal family. The portraits were taken on Coronation Day itself, with His Majesty pictured in full regalia in the throne room at Buckingham Palace. Queen Camilla, for her part, is pictured in the green drawing room and is wearing Queen Mary's crown and the robe of estate. The King also released a coronation message thanking all those who were a part of the historic occasion and pledging to rededicate his life to service. Meanwhile, the Prince and Princess of Wales and their 3 children joined millions of volunteers right across the UK for the final day of coronation celebrations today. The King's grandchildren were helping out in Berkshire for the big help out. After a day of painting and digging, they then toasted marshmallows with the Scouts and tried their hand at a bit of archery. The Prime Minister was preparing food at a village hall in Hertfordshire, and he praised the weekend's efforts.
And it's community spirit like this that binds our country together. It's fantastic to be a part of it here today and help out myself. Now, on the weekend, I think no other country in the world could put on such a dazzling spectacle. And it was a proud expression of our history, our culture, our traditions, but also a reflection of the modern character of our country. It was deeply moving to be in the coronation service and incredibly uplifting. And it's an experience, I think, that nobody will forget for the rest of their lives.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister's been backing the Metropolitan Police as it faces criticism over arrests made during the King's coronation. 64 people in total were arrested, including people from the anti-monarchy group Republic and the environmental activist group Just Stop Oil. Rishi Sunak says officers acted based on what they thought was best. But Graham Smith, the CEO of the group Republic, called it a direct attack on democracy. Now, in news away from home, Ukraine has accused Russia of firing drones at multiple cities, including over 30 at the capital, Kyiv. Officials also claim Russia plans to take control of the key city of Bakhmut by tomorrow, which is Russian Victory Day. Meanwhile, President Zelensky will meet with the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, tomorrow to discuss a new EU support package. Former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko said Russia must stop its aggression.
We have destroyed civilian object, and this is just very easy to understand. Putin does not stop shelling Ukraine, and the only way how we can stop Putin is our joint victory, like we do in the Second World War. Today there was an anti-Hitler coalition. Today we create the anti-Putin coalition.
And here, the government plans to give £240 million to GP practices this year to improve on basic services. The money will be used to end the so-called 8 a.m. scramble to get an appointment and to introduce an online booking system. Receptionists will also have additional roles to speed up the booking process. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We will, of course, tonight talk about the coronation, the street parties that took place yesterday all over the UK, analyse just how good a weekend was it, what does it mean for the future of the monarchy and organisations like Republic. But talk about a good day to bury bad news, because it wasn't really until the middle of Friday afternoon that we began to get a full assessment of what had happened in the local elections. Labour has now become the biggest party in local government in England. Interestingly, the Conservatives lost over 1,000 seats. That's nearly a third of the seats that they were defending. But remember this, the last time most of those seats were fought was back in 2019, when they were on the verge of being virtually obliterated in a European election and indeed getting their worst result in 200 years as a party. So if you lose a third of your seats against a previous set of results that were at the time of an historic low for the party, things are pretty bad. Where did the votes go to? Well, interestingly, Labour, of course, were up, but the Liberal Democrats did very well, and the Greens did very well too. Projected vote share out of those local elections would be Labour on 36, the Tories on 29, the Lib Dems on 18, others on 17. But, and here's the point, people vote differently in local elections to the way they vote in general elections. And I can certainly tell you, from the county of Kent that I know best, there were all sorts of local deals being done between Labour, the Lib Dems and the Greens to try to get their best result. I think many of those people that voted Lib Dem and Labour and Green last Thursday would probably vote Labour in a general election. Now, the Tory newspapers will tell you that Rishi Sunak has brought stability. Well, I guess after Truss and Johnson, anything would have seemed more stable. But it is a stability in failure. And here's what's really going on, in my view. There are many of those people who left the Labour Party, whose families have been Labour since 1918, that started voting for UKIP. And they were voting UKIP in very considerable numbers. Most of those voted Conservative in 2019. But this is not the Brexit they voted for. There are rumours that the next set of net migration figures could be as high as 700,000. This is not what people voted for. They look at Sunak, the former head boy from Winchester, as being even more detached from their lives than David Cameron was. And certainly this weekend in Kent, I met UKIPers who'd gone to the Conservatives who voted Labour last Thursday. Just look at Medway as a very good example, an area within which is Rochester, a seat that UKIP even managed to win in a parliamentary by-election, then became a big Conservative majority, and after 23 years of Tory control, Medway's gone to Labour. I put it to you that the Tories are doomed. There is no way back for them between now and the general election. Let me know what you think. Farage at gbnews.uk. I would also add that it's thoroughly deserved, because I think they've let us down very badly. Now, somebody who's been studying all of this is Professor Matthew Goodwin, author of Sunday Times bestseller, which we did actually, I think, help promote on this show, Values, Voice and Virtue, the New British Politics. Matthew, good evening. You wrote a piece about this in the Sunday Telegraph, and you're saying that basically the party's being squeezed from both sides.
Yeah, good evening, Nigel. I think what we're seeing is really the nightmare scenario for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives. On one side, they're being squeezed, as you say, by the resurgence of Labour, the Lib Dems and the Greens, especially in those southern blue wall areas, which have been trending away from the Conservatives for about 10 years. But also on the other side, we saw the biggest losses for the Conservatives at these local elections in those strongly pro-Brexit areas, in many northern industrial red wall types of areas. So not only is Rishi Sunak really losing some of those key southern Tory strongholds, but they're also now being chased out of that all-important territory in the red wall. Now, I would argue that the reason for that is because the Conservatives have never really made a choice. They've never really leaned in to what people wanted out of Brexit. They've continued to give them mass immigration. They've continued to give them all of the things that voters didn't really want ahead of 2016. And so they're not pleasing anybody. They're not really holding those levers, and now they're really losing those remainers. And I think this is why we saw the party plunge below 30% at the local elections, and why, if there were a general election tomorrow, Nigel, we would almost certainly have a Labour-led government, if not a Labour majority.
Yeah, I mean, lots of speculation, Matthew, that, you know, given these results, given that it's 36% vote share for Labour, it's not enough for them to win outright. But my feeling is a lot of those Lib Dem and Green votes would actually, in a first-past-the-post constituency system, you know, Labour would pick up many of those votes next time round, is what I think.
Well, look, remember, for the Conservatives, it's majority or bust at the next election. Nobody's going to work with the Conservatives. They need to be 3.5 points ahead in order to win a majority, and they're currently trailing Labour by 15 points in the national polls. Labour, on the other hand, doesn't even really need a majority to emerge as the largest party to be running a government. It can work with the Lib Dems. It could even work with the SNP. Of course, these local elections also, remember, don't take into account Scotland. So the worse the SNP do, as I did remind many Conservatives who were cheering on the demise of Nicola Sturgeon, the better the Labour Party will do, because it's likely to win back more seats north of the border. So, look, I think I'm broadly where you are on this. I think basically Labour are probably going to do a little bit better than these local elections would imply. I think the big grenade that's going to go off this year through the summer and so on is going to be the debate over migration. I think Rishi Sunak is going to struggle to bring down the numbers of small boats in the Channel, and I think the level of legal migration as we go through this year into 24 is going to shock a lot of people. I think that debate is going to come back with a vengeance.
let's just say that next week, half a dozen aeroplanes took off, fully loaded for Rwanda. Could he, if Sunak did something like that, could he turn this round?
Well, I think that's part of the recovery story. He also needs inflation to collapse to 2-3%. And as we can see, core inflation, food price inflation is stubbornly persistent. He's going to need the small boats to really come down. And he's also, to be blunt, going to need legal migration to stay at reasonable levels. And I'm going to go out on a limb and predict that actually what we see at the end of May is going to be the complete opposite of that. I've got, very credible people who are very close to the data telling me that the last numbers of 504,000 are going to be massively eclipsed by what we're going to see at the end of May. So I think put your seatbelts on, because the debate about housing, the debate about the NHS crisis, the debate about national security and integration, all of that stuff I actually think is going to come back with a vengeance as we near into that general election. So I'm very sceptical, actually, about Rishi Sunak's chances of turning this around.
No. Well, if you're right, Matthew Goodwin, it's goodbye at Red Wall, and thank you for joining us this evening. I'm now joined by veteran journalist and commentator, and even somebody who read a book about me not so long ago, Michael Crick. Michael, there was a lot
before we start,
yeah,
there's a bit you missed out there.
Go on.
What happened to the party you're now president of, which was called the Brexit Party, and is now called Reform UK?
It was up.
You got 6 councillors.
Yes, up.
Up, yeah, but I mean, 6 councillors, 6% in the places you stood.
Do you know what?
You're going nowhere, aren't you?
Do you know what? Wait and see what they try to do this week on the Mayor of London, and maybe that'll kickstart reform. But getting new parties off the ground and new brands off the ground is difficult, and I'm not...
And the reason why you managed it twice was you had PR for the European elections,
yes,
which, of course, is no longer there.
Yes.
But, of course, the outcome of all of this scenario this week, you can see a way to get to PR for Westminster. Probably won't happen, but it might happen.
Well, I wonder.
Yeah.
I wonder, because this is the thing I was really keen to talk to you about. Clearly, lots of tactical voting was going on in local elections, deals being done all over the country.
But they're almost unsaid deals, I think. Yeah. It's a bit like, when you have sex, you don't actually need to explain to the other person what you're going to do.
This is before the watershed, but we're doing our best. It's all right. yeah, it's unspoken. No, I get that.
Yeah.
Tell you what interests me. Number one, are we likely to see more tactical voting? And I think the last few elections we have seen voters saying, you know what, these are the people I want to get the other lot out. And so much of our first-past-the-post voting is actually negative voting. It's who we don't want to win as opposed to who we do want to win. But here's my thought. The Tory party have held on to first-past-the-post. No debate. It's the right system. It gives us stable government. Well, even with this system, we finished up from 2010 to 2015 with a coalition with the Liberal Democrats. Could it be, under first-past-the-post, with increased tactical voting, that actually they do worse under first-past-the-post than they would under PR?
You mean Labour do worse, or the
Tories? The Tories
do worse.
I just wonder about this. I just wonder about.
Well, there comes a point where that does happen, of course. Yeah,
there does come a point where that happens. But the Lib Dems, Ed Davey, wildly bullish about the party's prospects. Do you think he can do what they did back in 2010 and win over 50 seats?
I think they can. They will win significantly more. I would have said you're talking about the 30s, 40s, but things could change. I mean, Ed Davey is not a Nick Clegg who was perceived to have won that election, or at least to have performed best in 2010. Although actually the number of seats went down that the Liberal Democrats got. Nonetheless, he got enough to hold the balance of power and therefore a coalition. But the Lib Dems are going to be so cautious this time. Every time they've done a deal with somebody, they've regretted it. Yeah. They did a deal with the Callaghan government, they regretted that. They did a deal secretly with Blair in the 90s, before Labour came to power. They regretted that because Labour reneged on it, apart from the bit about PR for the European Parliament, which is where you came in.
Yeah.
And they regret the coalition. So they're only going to get into bed with Labour if they get something really, really substantial. And it seems to me that's something really, really substantial. Is Labour. Otherwise, they're going to say, OK, well, we'll consider it, bit by bit as you come up with proposals in Parliament.
those UKIP voters, and you came around the country and you met them, and they literally had come from families, in many cases, been Labour since the First World War. They voted UKIP, they voted for Johnson in 2019 in big numbers. They're now going back to Labour. Is there anything Sunak can do to get them back, in your view?
Well, some of them are going back to Labour. I don't think they're all going back to Labour, because I think once you've stopped voting Labour after 100 years in your family, you may well just abstain, or you may... And, Farage hasn't really sold himself... Well, he hasn't really sold himself very well anywhere, because he's not that kind of character. But I think particular in those red wall areas where you did so well at times in the past. I'm not convinced. My view is that Labour will end up with a minority Labour government. That Starmer won't get enough for a majority. It'll be short, and then he'll have to rely. He can't really rely on the SNP because of the implications of that. He then depends on the Lib Dems, and then what happens? But there's still so many unknowables. I mean, not just you've got the immigration issue. You've got obviously got the economy, which could get worse easily, and
housing. Yeah. Housing becoming a bigger and bigger issue, whether you're trying to buy or rent. Yeah. Michael, I think they're doomed. You think the Conservatives still could have a chance of winning next year?
I think it's most unlikely that Sunak would remain... there'll be a Conservative Prime Minister after the next election. Because even if they become the biggest party, nobody's going to go do a deal with them, apart from the DUP and with, say, 8 or 9 seats. So, Labour... If the votes have swung towards Labour, and even if Labour get fewer seats than the Tories, the momentum will be Labour's way, and it's then up to momentum to work out some way of getting becoming a government. But the problem is it'll probably be an unstable government that requires an election a year down the road, and what can they do in that year to persuade the public that it's worth voting for? Worth voting for.
As Brenda from Bristol would say, oh no, not another one. But I have to say, I think they're doomed. I think we all think to some extent they are doomed. In a moment, we're going to talk about the rental housing market. There are fewer and fewer houses on the rental market, yet Michael Gove wants to bring in even more draconian rules for landlords. In a moment, is Michael Gove a communist?
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So are the Tories doomed? Some of your thoughts coming in. Peter says, show me a political party that supports the monarchy, wants Brexit to succeed, vow to remove all those who don't belong here legally, and give free passage to all those that hate our country. I'll vote for them, I promise. Yeah, Peter, I think a lot of people would. One viewer says, I don't care who leads, as both parties are indistinguishable from each other at this point. And Peter says, Sunak's Conservative Party is not the party I can support anymore. Truth is, folks, on most of the really, really big issues that affect people's lives, we've got high tax, big state, social democrats to choose from. That is my view. Now, a really, really important issue. I'm getting emails coming in to my website from landlords. Now, you hear the word landlord, you think, these are very, very wealthy, nasty, exploitative people. Actually, in most cases, nothing could be further from the truth. But it would appear this government is now at war with landlords. There is this week going to be a renters' reform bill that comes before Parliament. And basically what's happened to landlords is there have been a substantial number of tax changes, of regulatory changes. It's going to be very difficult to get rid of tenants that you'd rather weren't in your properties. The tax advantages have all but disappeared. Interest rates, of course, are up if you've borrowed money to buy a house that you're letting. Stamp duty has gone up on second homes. Whichever way you look, it's been tough for landlords. So guess what's happened? Lots of landlords are now simply selling their properties, and those properties are removed from the rental market. The impact is extraordinary. In London alone, in the last year, rents are up by almost 20%. And for students away at university, it's reached a total crisis. In Bristol, believe this, in Bristol, since 2019, rents for students are up by 58%. Chris Binodi, a leading city money manager, has called Michael Gove a communist for the level at which the state is now interfering with people with their own properties wanting to rent. Well, I'm pleased to say that Russell Quirk, long-time property expert, joins me.
Good evening.
There are fewer and fewer houses now on the rental market.
Yep, so the latest survey suggests that about 70,000 landlords exited the market just last year. And of course, that's without the majority of those penal measures coming into play that you just referenced. So we haven't yet seen the Section 21 repeal, which will be very, very soon by way of the Rental Reform Act, which is the so-called the unfair evictions clause within tenancy agreements, which, of course, the political parties have bashed around as a political football on the basis that tenants should not be evicted willy-nilly. Now, of course, the reality is that when tenants get to the end of their assured short-hold tenancy contract length, of course, that contract then is finished, and then either the tenant and the landlord will renegotiate and carry on, or indeed they part. What this particular bill is seeking to do is to stop landlords being able to get rid of tenants under pretty much any circumstances. That's number one. So that hasn't even come in yet. So there are a lot of landlords.
This is Michael Gove's proposal.
This is Michael, and in fairness, it predates Michael Gove. It goes back, probably 5 or 6 housing ministers, which actually is probably only 2 or 3 years, in fairness, because we've had a lot. We've had a lot. Yeah. We've had 14, I think, in the last 12 years. But we've also had capital gains tax changes, literally in the last few weeks, where now, instead of getting your standard capital gains tax allowance as a landlord of £12,300, that was halved and then halved again. So then if you dispose of a property, your allowance is only £3,000. Landlords also 3 or 4 years ago saw a reduction in tax relief, so they're not now allowed to claim the cost of their mortgage against tax relief. And then, of course, we get this ridiculous notion that is banded around by both the Conservatives and Labour around proposed rent controls, this playing to the crowd, this audience of tenants, of which there are lots. There are about 4 million, Nigel, of course, so it's a big audience.
It's a big number.
And successive governments and multiple parties looking to try to appease tenants, frankly, for votes, But the unintended consequences of this, so that if you do push landlords out of the sector, as we're indicating, what do we think happens in terms of the supply of those properties?
So would it be possible that rents would go up?
Well, and you'll have more and more tenants, because
yeah.
house prices have gone up, so therefore tenants can't afford to buy. The population's increasing, whether it be because people are living longer or because, of course, we still have, and I don't want to get you triggered here, but we still have positive net immigration.
Huge.
So we have huge demand.
We're not even building enough houses every year to cope with immigration, let alone...
That's the next problem. So the Conservative government has long talked about 300,000 homes as a target. Of course, famously, and probably part of the fact that they got such a drubbing in the elections on Thursday was because they decided to do away with all housing targets. And now local authorities have no North Star with which to focus on in terms of housing targets. So the consequence of the economic situation we're in and the fact that the government has repealed targets means we're probably going to see about half of the new build properties built in this country over the next 12 months or so than otherwise we would have done. So it's a real, I mean, it's a perfect storm, but not in a good way.
And if you own a house that's 50 years old, 70 years old, whatever it is, and that's the one that you're letting, and that is your primary source of income, as it is in the case of many landlords.
And let's be clear, the average landlord only has 3 properties. So as you referred to in your preamble, this is not Legal and General with 10,000 properties, the big bad corporate landlord. The average landlord has just 3 properties. They're ordinary people.
And if those properties are 50, 60 years old, they've also got to meet new environmental standards, which cost-wise is enormous.
Well, the average, so that's not yet been introduced by the government, but again, Gove is dangling that as a threat over landlords. So this is the lunacy that is the quest for net zero, in my humble opinion, which is to say that landlords, and that there are hundreds and thousands of these properties, landlords that own properties that don't meet what they call EPC-C standards, so EPC goes from kind of A to F in terms of rating of energy efficiency. If your tenanted property doesn't meet that particular requirement, you have to pay the remediation cost to get it to that level. The average cost, it's muted, is going to be £10,000 per property. Now, where on earth are ordinary landlords that may have inherited a property, may have big mortgages that have just increased in cost, where are they going to be able to find that money times the 2 or 3 properties that they own, but also then how are they going to justify the business case for owning these properties? Now, a lot of people watching this will say, well, that's great, because all of these landlords will exit the market and all of those properties will come back into the market and therefore first-time buyers can buy them. It's not as simple as that. Those first-time buyers don't have to find big deposits. Mortgage rates, as we know, have increased. So, you know, this is going to be a significant problem. The government's lack of competence, successive governments, not just this one and however many previous ones we've had over recent months and years, the lack of competence in terms of actually building enough homes and letting landlords do their job and allow them a profit.
It's just extraordinary. And even holiday lets on Airbnb, you might need planning permission for. I have to say, Russell, this is the first time that I've touched this subject properly.
Won't be the last, I hope.
It won't be the last. No, we are going, I promise you on this programme, to return to this again and again and again. I'll be looking for the Renters Reform Bill when it's published this week. It is madness that fewer and fewer people are able to rent their homes. I promise you, we are coming back to this. In a moment, let's reflect on what I thought was an extraordinary weekend.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, I'm joined now by Ingrid Seward, raw biographer and editor-in-chief of Majesty magazine. Well, for somebody in your business, that was quite a weekend, really, wasn't it?
It was certainly quite a weekend, yes, for every journalist and photographer.
What did you think overall about Saturday? How did you feel? I mean, you know, not many people alive have seen a coronation. I mean, I have to say, I was blown away by it. I'd heard it was going to be modernised and changed, but actually it looked incredibly traditional, didn't it?
It did, and I think a lot of young people watching it, really young people, sort of in their 20s, couldn't quite understand this medieval sort of goings-on. And I was sort of saying to them, well, do you not like that? No, we love it. We just think it's funny. It's a bit like a sort of puppet show. But I think, I mean, they are the future, but they loved it too, which really was a good feeling, I think.
I think it went incredibly well. The only thing that went wrong, and I was commentating on it, with David Starkey and I were commentating on it, and we were doing our best to explain
what was going on,
the significance of the orb and the sceptre, and we really tried hard, you know, to sort of get those facts over of what all those ceremonies meant. But on my briefing notes, palace briefing notes, it said that the carriage with the King and Queen would arrive at 53, and it arrived at 48. Charles was there 5 minutes too early. He didn't look very happy outside, did he?
He wasn't very happy because, you know, naturally enough, there were lots of lip readers working out what he said, and he said, well, you know, why are we never on time? And he was sort of, he had a sort of pen moment, as we call it.
Yes.
I mean, almost had a bit of a hissy fit. But, of course, the Prince and Princess of Wales, who were in the State Bentley, got stuck behind his carriage. So they were late, because they should have been there in front of him, of course.
Yeah.
I mean...
But after that, it went beautifully. Yes, it rained, but they came out onto the balcony, the crowds went wild, 52 protesters were arrested, most of whom, by the way, were not from Republic. They were actually from Just Stop Oil and Animal Rising, and they do have a history, of course, of genuinely, you know, blocking roads and disrupting things. I thought the day was an absolute triumph. I think the world thought that too, didn't it?
I think the world thought that as well, and it was the military that was so wonderful. I mean, apparently there hadn't been such a gathering of military might since Sir Winston Churchill's funeral, which was one of the things we were told. And it was wonderful, and the coordination. Now, how the military dealt with the 6 minute early, I don't know how that... We will find out.
Somebody got the pacing wrong, I think, or the horses went too quickly or whatever. And yesterday, there were genuinely, where I live, street parties going on. I mean, literally everywhere. Roads closed, it was amazing. the concert last night, which looked beautiful, I thought, at Windsor, tasteful. I was a bit sceptical when I sat down. But a final thought, Ingrid, on William. You know, he is going to be our next king, and we don't know how long that's going to be. That speech that he gave, I mean, he went up there. He wasn't just at Windsor. He was on the world stage. He had his notes with him. He didn't refer to them once and gave that speech. That was good, wasn't it?
It was wonderful, and he got a huge round of applause. I mean, we were lucky journalists were there, and it was the most beautiful night. Fantastic occasion, great atmosphere. And William really nailed it. And he came across as completely sincere, saying when he was proud of his pa. And I think we really felt that he was. And it was a good feeling because you felt that William and his father, who've had their differences over the years, have really bonded. And that makes all of us feel secure. When you looked in the Abbey and saw that row of politicians, I thought, thank goodness we have a monarchy.
Well, I thought the whole thing was historic, magnificent, emotional. We've had in the space of just, well, a year, basically, we've had a jubilee, we've had the very sad death of our beloved Queen, a coronation. What's next?
Well, hopefully not a funeral.
Right. Well, it'd be very difficult to eclipse the last year. Ingrid, thank you
very much.
Very much indeed for giving us your reflections on what was an amazing and very memorable weekend. Now, my What the Farage moment. You know, the only people that support border controls for countries are bad people. People like Donald Trump and Nigel Farage. They're awful, terrible people. No, we should all be allowed freely to move around the world as we see fit. This is the doctrine of the European Union, of free movement, of Schengen. And yet, a press release that has come out in the last couple of days, temporary reintroduction of border controls. Yes, it's happening in Denmark, in Germany, in Sweden, in Austria, in France. And it's happening in Norway. It's happening in Slovakia. It's happening all around the European Union. And why is it happening? Well, people are worried about terrorism. They're worried about critical infrastructure. They're worried that huge numbers, hundreds of thousands of people every year, are now crossing the Mediterranean, and in many cases, guess what? They're undocumented young males, and of course some of them find their way to Dunkirk and Calais and here. There is a big global rethink on borders going on, and not before time. Now, a few weeks ago, we were up in Norfolk, and we spoke to Daniel Hurd, the coxswain of the Hemsby Independent Lifeboat. And he was going out with the crew, helping people whose houses were literally falling into the sea. But Daniel, something else has happened now. When you get a call in the summer, and it could be somebody on a lilo that's been blown out to sea, or a fishing boat, or whatever it may be, you put the blue light on the car, and you're now being told you can't have a blue light. What's going on?
Yeah, well, so this is more the inland Norfolk waterways we cover. So we cover 125 miles of the Norfolk Broads.
Yep.
We have 35 slipways we have to get the truck and vessel to. And we've now been stopped by Norfolk Police saying that we can't use blue lights because we're not under the drivers or the road regulations, 1989 for the lighting, RNLIR. But we've just been told we can't.
But if you're going around the Norfolk Broads in summer and someone's in trouble, I mean, the roads are packed. So the legislation says that the RNLI can use blue lights, but you're independent. But there are several other independents in Norfolk too.
Yes, sir. But like you just said, the RNLI, it says for launching lifeboats. So we look at it like that. It's for launching lifeboats. It don't say from A to B. We're launching a lifeboat which is going to be launched on the Norfolk Broads to potentially save someone.
Yeah.
The regulation needs to be rewritten to include independent lifeboats. At the moment, it seems like it's not on there at all, which it ain't. That needs to be rewritten to include independent lifeboats. But at the moment, because that's not in the legislation, there's not much we can do.
But couldn't Norfolk Police just use discretion? A lifeboat is a lifeboat, whether it's branded the Hemsby Independent one or whether it's branded RNLI.
Well, bearing in mind we've been operating 20 years, 20 years for the Norfolk Broads, been going 50 years, and we've used the blue lights for 20 years. apparently there was one small complaint went in, and then they looked into legislation which states the independent lifeboat's not mentioned in legislation.
You promised me you weren't joyriding around the area.
No, not at all.
With a blue
not
light
with a boat on the back, sticking to the speed limits. But the thing is, we don't want to break any exemptions, and that's not what we're asking for. We need to be able to get through traffic delays to get us to the launch point. And at the moment, we've taken it off service for the daytime use, operating. We're going to be operating from 6 in the evening till 6 in the morning.
It's crazy. Your volunteers. Today, of course, is Volunteer Day. People have been encouraged all over the country to volunteer. You guys do this for nothing. Daniel, thanks for giving us that ridiculous story, and it is ridiculous. We're going to write to Norfolk Police as a TV company and ask for some common sense to be applied.
Well, the thing is, we don't blame Norfolk Police for this. They've looked at legislation. The law's the law. We need Parliament and DFT to sit down and actually look at that legislation and get that amendment added.
Something's got to be done. Daniel, thank you very much indeed. Now, the other What the Farage moment is every single year, the television industry has its big annual dinner, and you can imagine the kind of thing that it is. Yeah, it's generally backslapping, self-congratulatory, the liberal media class saying, aren't we wonderful? Well, for best television news presenter, there's quite a long list of names this year. For some reason, my name's on that list. Yes, I'm on the list of runners and riders. And it is a public vote. And you can vote up until 5 o'clock this Friday. So I did send out a short video and an email this afternoon. And guess what? The website has crashed. Now, I'm not suggesting, of course, that this is a rigged election or anything like it, but I would, if you would like to support me in this, well, go to tric.org.uk, tric.org.uk. It'll be there on the GB News website. There are other GB News presenters on that list too. But if you want to vote for me, just imagine if we got the biggest public vote. Can you imagine their faces at that big celebratory dinner at the Grosvenor House Hotel? I can hardly wait. Will a new telephone system allow us to see our GPs? All of that in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This show started mid-July 2021. We're coming up for a couple of years. And the first broadcast I did, I said the problem of getting GP appointments was so bad that I thought many people who could afford it would start to go privately. Well, indeed, they have. But the point is, most people can't afford to go privately. And not being able to get hold or not being able to see a GP is a very, very big concern, and many people voted on that issue in the local elections that took place just last week. Such is the frustration. But the government have a genius new plan. This should sort the whole thing out. You know how at 8 o'clock the lines open and people are bombarded with phone calls in these GP surgeries, or they're queuing down the road or halfway around the block to try to book an appointment. Well, the government, they've got the solution. Yes. £240 million is going to be spent on new telephone systems. Yes, isn't that marvellous? New digital phones which will add callers to a queue, tell them where they are in that queue, and offer a callback facility. They haven't yet said whether the phone equipment will be made in China or not, but as if that is going to solve the whole problem, or am I being just too cynical? I'm joined by Dr. Richard Vaughtry, former chair of the BMA GP Committee. Richard, I'm sorry for that sarcasm, but I don't really see how dealing with telephone calls more efficiently allows us to see our GP more comfortably.
Well, I think this is the issue. We will welcome sort of any resource that we can get to improve the telephone experience that our patients have, enabling practices to access our surgeries through digital means. But the reality is we simply don't have enough GPs, don't have enough practice nurses, don't have big enough premises to actually accommodate the staff that we really need to deal with the needs of our growing population. And that's what the government should be focused on.
I think that choice of words there was very interesting, Richard. It is our rapidly growing population that's leaving us, leaving you guys in literally an impossible position. How many more GPs do you think? I mean, roughly, how many more GPs do we need in this country?
Well, a few years ago, the government promised 6,000 additional GPs. And rather than that increase, we've actually gone backwards rather than forwards. And yes, we are now fortunately starting to see younger doctors choosing general practice in increasing numbers, and we're training more doctors in general practice, but we're not retaining the workforce. We're not enabling them to work in a way that they feel able to. And so sadly, too many doctors are leaving or reducing their commitment in the NHS general practice service. And so we're not able to provide the number of appointments that we really do need, even though with the workforce that we've got, we have actually seen our workforce working incredibly hard and actually delivering more appointments now than they've ever done before. But
so they're back in the surgery rather than doing Zoom consultations?
Yes, in my surgery, we will see every patient who wants to be seen face-to-face. We will offer telephone consultations to those who prefer it. Maybe they're at work or they're at home and they would prefer that telephone consultation. We do that. But the majority of patients are coming into the surgery as they did before. Good. But there are still the same number of GPs, the same number of nurses, same number of physios and others in the surgery, and we need to expand our service to be able to accommodate with the growing list that we've got. Given the stress
Of being a GP and having a GP-patient ratio that's higher than it's ever been, and all of those difficulties, are you not tempted, Richard, to head down under to Australia, where GPs earn double the money they earn in the UK? And the story is a lot of men and women who are GPs are heading off to Oz.
Yeah, sadly, we are seeing doctors not just going to general practice services in Australia and New Zealand, but Canada and elsewhere in the world. And we can ill afford to lose any GP We spend an awful lot of money training GPs and supporting GPs. We need to ensure that we ensure the right working conditions so that they're not stressed, they're not finding themselves unable to provide the good quality service that they want to, and that we need to enable them to deliver that type of service and reward them accordingly.
Well, we do.
Within the UK.
We do. Richard Vultry, thank you very much indeed for joining me. It all makes me think that if the taxpayer has invested in getting doctors trained, perhaps there should be some form of indenture. Perhaps they should actually have to serve as a GP for several number of years in this country before they head off for the sunshine in Australia. Let's have a go at Barrage the Farage. My first one up today is Benita from Bexhill.
I would like to know if you could find out if all these asylum seekers that are being brought here have they been tested? Do we know? Have they got any records? Have they got any criminal records? And why is it all men? Why are there not women as well and children? Why just men?
Well, of course, Benita, you know, poor, desperate migrants. That's what the BBC will tell you in every single broadcast. Yes, it is. Vast majority young men, about 90% male and about 75% very young male. Look, the truth is, most people coming are not genuine refugees. They are people who are here seeking economic benefit. Sadly, for some, that will be in the criminal sector. There are times through fingerprinting, because they haven't got any passports. There are times through fingerprinting when we can find serious criminals, but as we know, there have been people who have known terrorist suspects coming in via these routes. It isn't working, Benita, at any level, and we're also told now an increasingly large number are using Theresa May's legislation to claim that somehow they've been trafficked. Let's go to Miles in High Wycombe.
Hi, Nigel. My name's Miles. I just want to ask a question. Do you think the government are doing enough for social housing as regards to maintenance, like plumbing, roofing, guttering and all general maintenance?
I think the truth is, Miles, that housing is in a massive, deep crisis, whichever way you look at it, whether it is government-owned, whether it is the lack of private rental, wherever you look, housing is a major, major crisis in this country. I did a big segment tonight on it. I'll do more. Now, Farage at Large is back. We're in Bournemouth this week, but don't apply for tickets because we're over capacity. We're going to have Right Said Fred, famous, of course, for I'm Too Sexy, which went to #1 in America. They'll be playing live for us in Bournemouth on Thursday, but if you go to the GB News website, there are 1 or 2 tickets left for other dates. I'm joined by Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob, what a weekend. Didn't it just show us what a constitutional monarchy actually is?
Oh, it's so exciting to have seen the coronation and to see the symbolism of it, that the king takes his oath to the people and is acclaimed by the people before he's anointed by God. It is a contract. It's not a king imposed upon us from above. And that's, I think, the success of the British Constitution.
Yeah, since 1688, actually served us really rather well compared to many other parts of the world. And I do worry slightly, Jacob, that a lot of young people are undecided on this, but I kind of think education hasn't helped.
But, Nigel, most of our viewers won't believe this, but you and I were both young once. And all these many years ago, a lot of our contemporaries weren't that excited by the monarchy. Now they're middle-aged and they love the monarchy. I think it's one of those things that people become more interested in as they appreciate the benefits of a constitutional monarchy.
Big debate tonight, Jacob.
Very exciting tonight. We've got Bill Cash on. We're talking about why have we still got all these EU rules covering us when we voted to leave in 2016? You should probably stay and discuss it with him.
I'll be listening in the car. I'll be driven completely mad by it, I'm certain. But before all of that, let's get the all-important weather, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Hello there, welcome to your GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. I'm Craig Snell. As we go through the next few days, really it's a mixture of sunshine and scattered showers. Some of these showers will be quite heavy and thundery. It's all down to this area low pressure. It's not really going to go far over the next few days, keeping us with rather changeable conditions, but in any sunshine it should feel fairly pleasant if you are out and about. So as we end Bank Holiday Monday, still got some thunderstorms across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland. Could just see a little bit of disruption here. Otherwise, this band of heavy rain will spread across many southern and eastern parts of England. But then later on in the night, really, most of us turn a little bit drier, but rather cloudy and damp. And temperatures for most actually staying in double figures. So a bit of a grey start on Tuesday. Still some overnight rain to contend with in the east. Sunshine will develop, but that in turn will allow some showers to quickly form, and these showers will turn heavy and thundery in places, especially come the afternoon. Also quite slow moving across parts of England and Wales, so could see large amounts of surface spray on the road, so do take care if you are out and about. In the sunshine, though, it will feel fairly pleasant, highs reaching 20 or 21 degrees in the south. The showers will rumble on as we go into the evening, but for most it should turn drier and clearer as we head towards midnight. But it won't last in the west. Another band of rain and showers will spread in here. But over towards the east, with the clearer skies, a cooler night than the night to come. But out towards the west, another mild one, with temperatures here staying firmly in double figures. So after some sunshine in the east as we start Wednesday, really it goes downhill from the west as this next band of rain and showers spread its way in. And overall, really, Wednesday's another day of bright spells and scattered showers. And again, some of them showers could potentially be quite heavy and thundery. Very little changes as we go into Thursday, another day of sunshine and showers, but hopefully something a little bit drier coming through as we go into Friday.
It's all about family.